Welcome to Stories from the Village of Nothing Much. Like easy listening, but for fiction. I'm Kathryn Nicolai. I write and read all the stories you'll hear on the Village of Nothing Much. Audio engineering and sound design is by Bob Wittersheim. In our show notes, you'll find links to our ad-free premium version, our other shows, and our merch and partner products. Hey, let's take a break together. There are a lot of things you can do to help reset your nervous system. You probably hear a lot about that these days, but here's my take on it. Yes, we're all pretty stressed. Yes, we need to close out our incomplete stress cycles and shift into the rest and digest response, but make it cute. Your self-care can be whimsical. It can be soothing and charming and not feel like a chore. And having it be fun rather than like flossing will make it so much more likely that you will come back and do it again tomorrow. So I write stories that lean on my decades of experience as a yoga and meditation teacher that help you settle and focus on good things. Stories are like nutrient dense. They can heal and uplift and reset. And all you need to do is listen. And if you're using this show to sleep, I'm just going to gently redirect you to our bedtime story show, the one that's just called Nothing Much Happens. This one is the daytime version, meant to be a companion to your commute or walk or couch time. So please do not leave us a grumpy review because this noisier version woke you up. This isn't the sleepy one, okay? And now, just because it will make us feel good, take a deep breath in through your nose and sigh from your mouth. Again, breathe in. Sigh it out. Good. Ship in a bottle. Autumn had stretched itself about as far as it could go, and I was grateful for every extra moment. On my walk in this morning, along the gravel path from the parking lot up to the great house, I stopped to admire a few of the towering oaks and maples that were still in full color. It had stormed the night before, and their bark showed nearly black from the rain. The long, straight line of their trunks pulled my eyes up to the bounty of bright yellow leaves above. Had they always been this tall? I felt like I had never really seen them before. They were like arrows that had been shot down into the soil with foliage just fletching rather than feathers. And I imagined one of the old gods of mythology drawing back a bow to send them to earth. Something about this place lent itself to fanciful thoughts. From the labyrinth out in the East Meadow, where I walked at lunchtime, to the solarium where I'd watched the Amorphophallus titanium bloom for the first time in 3 years, to the map room on the 3rd floor filled with atlases that were written when my great-great-grandparents were children, and glass display cases of the artifacts and rare objects we collected. It was a special place, this estate, and I hoped our visitors felt the magic of it the way I did. It had been a family home when it was first built, with acres of gardens and forests around it. A stately home with turrets and wings and a dumbwaiter that had once brought tea trays up from the kitchen to the drawing room. When it had passed to a new generation, it was converted into a museum of sorts. We had collections of paintings and portraits, local histories and maps. The grounds had likewise been made public, and many people came every day to trek through the woods or quietly pace the labyrinth. There were fountains and statues to admire, benches to sit at with a book or sack lunch, and a broad pond filled with bright orange fish that swam in a mesmerizing school, like an underwater murmuration. I'd done a bit of everything in the years I'd been here. I'd led tours and planted flowers and dusted cases. I'd raked the white stones of the labyrinth into place at the end of the day. Now I worked just inside the front door, behind a small desk, to direct visitors and hand out leaflets. I knew the story of just about every painting in the ballroom, every plant in the solarium, and map up on the 3rd floor. And when asked, was happy to share, though mostly I was called upon simply to welcome people as they stepped through the heavy oak door. I kept a basket at my desk with my crochet hook and skein of yarn, and had made quite a few scarves while sitting in the calm quiet of the entryway. Today, though, would be a bit more eventful. We'd gotten a bequest, a legacy from the estate of a distant cousin related to the original owners. He'd come to visit us once, many years ago, when he was researching his family tree. He'd spent a good amount of time up in the map room and gazing at the portraits of his distant relatives. Like so many of our visitors, he'd fallen in love with the house and gardens, but obviously this place had meant something a bit more to him, and he had remembered us in his will. We didn't know exactly what was in the crate that arrived, but today we would find out. We'd set aside a room off the main hall that had once been a small sitting room, but now was a place where things were stored and restored when out of the collections. We had a sturdy work table spread with a heavy drop cloth, and the crate waiting for us on top of it. It had arrived late in the afternoon the day before, and though I had been impatient to dig right in, we'd all agreed to wait till today, when more staff could participate, and we would have the whole day to catalog what we unpacked. I'd been so curious about what we might find inside that I'd fallen asleep thinking of it, and dreamt about the crate. In the dream, when we pried open the top and looked down into it, instead of seeing objects and books, there were stairs, like the ones in the large entryway, carpeted in dark red velvet, and with a handrail of polished wood. I'd been able to follow them down into a room full of new treasures, and it had felt like a better version of going through the looking glass, a place where I could just discover to my heart's content. And as I parked my car and walked up the path this morning, I'd thought to myself that I needed to adjust my expectations. That our bequest would be much more mundane, not nearly so otherworldly. But then I'd stop to stare at those trees in the grounds, with their nearly black trunks and bright yellow leaves, and remembered that the quotidian world would never be short of astounding wonders. So now we were here. I noticed that none of my colleagues were late this morning as we gathered around the work table. It took a few good whacks with a mallet against the crowbar, but then it was open, and we all leaned forward and looked down into the trove. Everything had been carefully wrapped, but right away I could make out the shape of a couple of paintings. There were several small boxes, and something very big, like a large cylinder whose wrapping was marked with the word fragile. We, each of us, reached in at the same time and bumped into each other and laughed. "Okay," someone said, "let's do one thing at a time, shall we?" We sheepishly agreed. One of the boxes held a collection of antique miniature books, tiny things, but properly printed and illustrated, and our map room docent took them aside straight away. Another box held fountain pens and a hat pin with a pale green stone in it, as well as some tarnished silver serving spoons. All of these things had clearly been handed down through the bequeather's family, just as so many objects in this house had. I could see why they had been left to us. The paintings, when unwrapped, were portraits, and judging by the style and clothing, had been painted around the time our great house was built. In fact, one face was very familiar, and we carried it out into the hall to set it on the rail beside the portrait of the family's patriarch. We all looked back and forth from one face to another. Brothers? We asked each other. Maybe even twins, I said. The last bit of treasure to be unwrapped, the piece marked fragile, proved to be a ship in a bottle. According to the yellowed label at its base, it was more than 150 years old. Through a layer of dust, I marveled at the tiny, intricate pieces that came together so perfectly. It had a foremast, a midmast, and a mizzen, a quarterdeck, a crow's nest, and even a tiny figurehead. I could look at it for ages and still not see every detail. Right beside my desk in the entryway was a large round table. We usually topped with fresh flowers, but I would do my best to convince my colleagues that this amazing artifact should sit at its center. Guests, and also I, would be able to enjoy it in the light of the front windows and imagine ourselves sailing away into the horizon. Sunday reset. It changed how I thought about it when I changed what I called it. Funny how that works sometimes. How words can reframe things, change a perspective. I used to try to use my Sundays to clean. Sundays were for chores, and just thinking about that made me resent it a bit. I knew the dishes needed to be done and fresh sheets needed to be put on the bed, but I begrudged giving a day of the week to it. Then I took some advice from a friend of mine. She talked about resetting her space at the end of the week to make the next week easier, more enjoyable. I could get behind that. So I started to reset, to think of it not as what needed to be cleaned up from last week, but what would be a gift to future me. And not just along the lines of food in my fridge and clear counters, but what would help me focus and feel rested and taken care of. It turned the day into something I looked forward to, and I took my time with. And today was a reset day. The fall was turning into winter. But as sometimes happens when the seasons change, Mother Nature was treating us. Sometimes it felt like she was teasing us by rewinding into weather from a few months before. So as the sun rose, I stepped out onto my balcony in my slippers with a blanket pulled around me and a hot cup in my hand, and felt quite comfortable in the nearly warm morning air. I let the sun shine on my face and closed my eyes and imagined my battery charge percentage climbing point by point from the warmth and brightness. On the street below, I could hear people walking, dogs barking. The coffee shop at the end of the block must be roasting beans this morning. I could smell the dark, chocolatey scent in the air. When my cup was empty, I stepped back inside and set it in the sink. Before I did anything else, I wanted to wash my face and get dressed. As long as I was in my pajamas, I was like a car in neutral. But once I was dressed, teeth brushed, and face seen to, I was in gear, moving forward. I stripped my bed and started a load of laundry, opening a few windows along the way to let in some fresh air. Then I went from room to room, resetting. It didn't take long, hanging up the sweaters and jackets that had landed outside of the closet over the week, sorting through magazines and mail and tidying my dresser and coffee table. I swept the floors and wiped down the kitchen counters. I realized I was working in silence and wanted a bit of music to keep me company. I'd bought myself a fancy vintage-style record player for my birthday a few months before and was slowly growing my vinyl collection. I like to play records while I reset. That way, every half an hour or so, I'd need to flip the record or choose a new one, and it kept me on my feet and interested. I picked out an album that had first come out when I was a freshman in high school. It was wistful and angsty, a voice that had felt like a revolution at the time. I still knew all the words. I took the record from the sleeve, propping the sleeve on my now listening to shelf, and lowered the record carefully onto the turntable. It was an automatic player, so I just lowered the lid and turned the dial, and the arm lifted and positioned itself over the spinning disc until the needle found its groove. I smiled at the first few bars, thinking about my younger self, listening in my dark bedroom before falling asleep. Sure that all the very big things I was feeling had never been felt quite like this before. In some ways, that had been the reset I needed. Year by year, I'd gotten myself to the next day, the next season, and so I was grateful for all those previous iterations of me. I guessed one day I'd look back on the me of now with the same affection that I had for my younger self. We were all doing our best, and it was enough. I heard the musical chime of the washing machine completing its cycle and took my clothes rack out onto the balcony. In this warm sunlight, my sheets would dry pretty quickly, and fresh air would seep into the fabric, so that every time I turned over in the night and my nose found the pillow, I would breathe it in while I slept. I might even dream of summer wind and open spaces. I took the damp linens out of a big basket and started to shake out and pin up each piece. It was something my grandmother had always done when she hung towels on the line. She'd shake them out vigorously, snapping the fabric over the grass. She said it made the towels fluffier, and though these were sheets and pillowcases, I still did the same thing. I clamped my hands firmly around the edges of the sheet and draped it over the railings as I shook it. I spotted my neighbor in the apartment opposite, watering his plants on his balcony, and we waved. The street below was getting busier as folks took advantage of the weather. It made me think about what else would help set me up for the week. A walk in the park? A new book from the bookshop? I checked the fridge and pantry and saw that I was still pretty well stocked for lunches and such, but wouldn't it be nice to have a fresh loaf of bread from the bakery for sandwiches? While the sheets dried, I'd head down onto the street and pick up a few other things. Epsom salts and eucalyptus oil for a bath, a bouquet of fall flowers for the kitchen table, a quart of soup from the deli for dinner, and maybe a new record to listen to before bed. I was taking care of me in lots of little ways, and it sure felt good. Thanksgiving at Weathervane Farm. The weather vane on top of the barn was turning in a slow circle. It creaked just a bit as it spun, and often I couldn't hear it over the other sounds in the yard, the quacking and braying and lowing that were part of everyday life. But when I could hear it, I smiled. I liked the sound of it and wouldn't have oiled it even if I could have easily gotten up onto the peak. It was like the bang of a screen door or the groan of a squeaky stair, familiar and friendly sounding. These were the sounds of my home, and the home of lots of animals as well. We were a sanctuary of sorts for those who needed a safe place to land. And all the animals who came here would never have to leave again. They could spend their remaining years in leisure and surrounded by friends. I've always been sensitive to animals, worried about the bird with the sore wing, bringing in foundlings since I was little and helping them back to health. And though the farm is an awful lot of work, it gives me much more than it takes. Just knowing that our animals are protected, spending time with them, building trust and friendships with them. Well, it's hard to explain if you don't think about animals like I do. But I felt very lucky to play the role of caretaker here. Our cow, who had come to us scared and pregnant, now walked straight over to me each morning and trusted me to play with her calf, Winnie the Moo, who was a year old. We'd installed some brushes in their stall, and they took turns rubbing against them, getting all the best scratches in the right spots and moving enthusiastically. The donkeys were almost too affectionate. They were like giant puppies who just wanted attention and squeaky toys and as much barley straw as I could supply. If I laid down in the pasture, the pigs were the first to snuggle up to me, and we could happily nap all afternoon if the chores were done. The ducks came when I called, and if I had a fresh bowl of water and frozen peas for them, there was nearly a stampede of orange feet slapping against the old plank floors of the barn. And I wasn't the only one who loved and was loved by our animals. We had an active group of volunteers who helped us do everything from mucking out stalls and administering medicines to setting up salvaged play equipment for the goats and rebuilding fences that, again, the goats had knocked down. Caring for the animals had brought us all together, and we found that we now felt a bit like a family. So when I thought about Thanksgiving this year, I thought about how thankful I was to them and how I wanted to share dinner with my family. We extended invitations, guessing that most people would be otherwise spoken for, and that we might only be setting a table for a few folks. But to our surprise, many yeses came back. In fact, lots of people asked if they could bring their families with them, their kids, their sweethearts, and we were thrilled. The more, the mooier, we said. Dinner would be served at 3, but we'd invited our guests to come a bit early so that they could visit with the animals before we ate. Around 1 o'clock, cars began arriving, pulling onto the verge along our long driveway, and soon there was a trail of folks carrying casserole dishes and laden crock pots up to the house. Luckily, our old farmhouse had a big kitchen, and we somehow managed to find spots for everything to warm before we ate. It was a lovely feeling, friends coming and going, stopping to share a hug or a bit of news over the oven, the dogs giddy with all the attention, and more calls of hello and happy Thanksgiving each time the front door opened. After the food was seen to, most made a beeline out to the pastures or barn. Everyone had a favorite animal friend to visit, and I'd set out a basket of carrots and apples and peas and barley grass for them to share. I noticed a girl of about 10 or 11 standing at the fence with a row of donkeys jockeying for her attention. They batted their long eyelashes at her and were so gentle as she raised a hand to stroke their heads. I ambled up beside her and told her their names. "This one is Penny," I said, pointing. "And that's Turnip and Bumblebee. And this girl is Muriel," I said with a chuckle. We had no plans when it came to naming our animals, and it showed. "Muriel," she said, and stretched out a flat palm to her, with barley balanced atop it. She was well versed in donkey facts and told me that they'd been domesticated 6,000 years ago and that their large ears helped to keep them cool. I smiled to myself as I listened. I had been like that when I was her age, finding a topic that interested me and then learning as much as I could about it. I hoped she would keep learning and one day perhaps become a large animal veterinarian or work in wildlife conservation or be a farrier. Just then I felt a tap on my shoulder and heard a whisper in my ear saying, "We're ready." I'd arranged for a little surprise before we shared dinner today. I'd been to a wedding in September that had had an excellent 4-piece jazz band. They'd played up in the ballroom at the inn, and dancing to their music had given me an idea. So I'd booked them for today, early enough that if they wanted to get to their own Thanksgiving afterward, they could, but we'd also have places at our table for them. They would play not so much for our guests, but for our goats and cows and donkeys and all of the animals we cared for. They set up their drum kit, an upright bass, electric piano, and trumpet beside the pasture. And as the guests looked on, they began to play. Right away, the cows, who'd been chewing grass and carelessly flicking their tails, turned and began nearly galloping over to the fence line. The goats in their playpen echoed the trumpet, bleating along, and the donkeys put their ears back and brayed. As I watched the animals, the musicians, and our guests all delighting in each other's actions and reactions, I felt my heart fill to the brim. Here was something I was endlessly thankful for, getting to be a part of this. I thought of a quote by Rabindranath Tagore that summed up what I felt. He said, "I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was service. I acted and beheld. Service was joy." All 3 of today's stories made me daydream. That's what's written on my business card, by the way. Chief Daydream Officer. Just kidding. It actually says Architect of Cozy. For real, when I sold my first book, I treated myself to business cards that said that. Since it's no longer 1997, I haven't actually needed to hand out any of those cards, but still, it was important to treat myself. The Great Estate in the first story has appeared in many other NMH tales. And if you'd like to sort of visit it yourself, I've got 2 ideas for that. First, you could come to Michigan and take a tour of the Cranbrook House and Gardens, which is its inspiration. Or you can listen to episode 58 of this show, in which I take you on an imaginary walking tour of the house. Or do both. This episode touches on the idea of restoration of precious objects, and there's something really special about that. It takes care and patience and a deep desire to make something last or come to life again, and that feels really affirming to me. If you haven't watched that show, Repair Shop from BBC One, oh, my friend, I am about to change your life. These are such lovely craftspeople doing amazing work. The women who restore people's teddy bears have like the highest emotional intelligence I have ever witnessed. It's amazing. And I also just heard that there is a British bake-off style show where instead of baking, they make miniatures, like dollhouse furniture. And I just thought you should know about that. You can watch it on YouTube. I write a bit about a dream in this story, of opening the crate and taking stairs down into a world filled with fascinating things. And it made me wonder if you have heard about and can relate to a recent online topic called Mall World. It turns out a lot of people dream about being in malls. And one of them dreamt about it so regularly and specifically that she drew a map of the mall and the other buildings it was connected to, including an airport, a parking garage, a hospital, among many others. She also mentioned that the bathrooms in Mall World were always terribly dirty, that the stall doors didn't close all the way, that the toilets were shaped weird and nothing worked. And slowly, lots of people began to comment that they visit the same world in their dreams, that they'd been in those bathrooms, that the map matched what they knew. Now listen, I don't know what any of that means. Perhaps it is a case of there being more in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy. But while I occasionally dream of Mall World, and I also have unfortunately been to those bathrooms, yikes, I wondered if anyone else has been going to Mansions World. Because that's, as the kids say, not my neighborhood, but I know my way around. I dream of giant houses full of doors and stairways that lead to ever-expanding rooms of very interesting artifacts pretty regularly, and have since I was a kid, and my mom does too. Sometimes if I get to the very top of my mansion, I can take the escalator up into Mall World. And if you can relate to this, drop us a comment on our Instagram, TikTok, or Facebook accounts. It's all under Nothing Much Happens. And if you are a mall worlder, some folks are trying to meet up in their dreams. I tend to hang out in the food court, not the modern one, the abandoned one from the 80s. See you there for some Pizza Hut? Now I've got some more notes on these stories, but I feel like I've probably lost most of you by now. So I'll just say that the album I was thinking of in that Reset episode, the one that came out when I was a freshman and had a voice that sounded like something I'd never heard before, was Sarah McLachlan, Fumbling Toward Ecstasy. But Natalie Merchant's Tiger Lily could also go there. Talk about an album without a single miss. Okay, thanks for hanging out with me and listening to me blather away. Till next time, buddies, I wish for you a dream of something dazzling, an opportunity to take care of your future self, and that you get to see one of those videos of ducks eating frozen peas from a bowl. Perfection.